Substance Abuse Prevention. Lesson 2, Substance Abuse and Public Health. About the instructor. My name is Amanda, and I'm a student at Arizona State University. I study health education and health promotion. I created this lecture series, and I'm super friendly, so if you have any questions or comments or concerns or anything like that, please feel free to reach out. You can always comment under the lecture videos, or you can post on the Instagram and Facebook pages that I'll be giving you the addresses for those later on in the lecture. Or feel free to direct message me with any comments or questions. And I'll make sure to get back to you in a timely fashion. What are we going to be talking about today? Well, today's topic is substance abuse and public health. This is lecture number 2 in a series of 12 lectures on substance abuse disorder prevention. In this video, we are going to discuss the prevalence of substance abuse disorder. And also, we're going to talk about the negative consequences that substance abuse disorder can create on a broader scale. In lesson 1, we touched on some negative health consequences that the individual might experience, and we're going to kind of expand our perspective in this lecture. Student learning objectives. As you can see in the pink square, student learning objective number 1 says that participants will be able to explain 3 negative public health consequences of substance abuse in writing with 100% accuracy. Think of this as kind of an overall objective for the entire lecture. The second student learning objective says participants will be able to explain in writing 1 negative outcome of substance abuse on public health with 100% accuracy. Number 3 is participants will be able to explain in writing 1 negative outcome of substance abuse on familial life with 100% accuracy. And number 4 is participants will be able to explain 1 negative outcome of substance abuse on communities in writing with 100% accuracy. Here is a summary of everything that we're going to be covering in lesson number 2. We're going to start off by talking about the prevalence of substance abuse. We'll do a short reflection after we discuss some statistics about the prevalence of substance abuse. The next thing that we're going to cover is the public health consequences. After we do that, we will do a reflection activity and a written assignment. Following that, we're going to talk about family consequences, and then similarly, we'll do a reflection and a written assignment. And then the last topic will be community consequences, followed by a reflection and written assignment. At the end of the lesson, we will review the materials that were presented, and then we will also review the assignments as well. And then we will end with an optional assignment, an independent practice assignment that you can choose to do, and we'll talk about that at the very end of the lecture. So let's think about it. Do you think that a lot of people suffer from substance abuse disorder? A lot? Only a few? If you had to guess, how many? We talked about the consequences that substance abuse can have on the addict in lesson 1. Do you think there are consequences for the people that surround the addict, like their family, their friends? What about their communities? What about the United States as a whole? I want you to pause the lecture just for a few minutes, maybe 2 to 3 minutes, and just imagine some of the broader consequences of substance abuse. After you've spent some time thinking about that, unpause the video and then we will continue on with the lecture. The first thing that we are going to be talking about today in lesson 2 is the prevalence of substance abuse. In 2017, over 11% of people over the age of 12 reported using an illicit substance within the month prior to taking the survey. Now, over 2% of this population that reported that they had used the illicit drug had reported abusing prescription medications. In the same year, 19.7 million Americans suffered from substance abuse disorder. Now, to put that into perspective, that's over 16% of the population of the United States. Now, we learned that in lesson 1, with substance abuse disorder comes the risk of death by overdose. In 2018, there were 67,367 recorded overdose deaths in the United States. This number places overdose as the leading cause of injury-related death in the United States. So, injury-related deaths are the deaths that are not caused by any chronic illness or acute illness or anything like that. They're injury-related, so they could be other injury-related deaths, just to put it into perspective for you, include car crashes, falls, anything that's done kind of by accident and it's an injury. Following these statistics leads us to our first activity reflection. I want you to take a few minutes to think about the statistics that we just saw. If you need to, you can rewind the video or pause it on that screen so you can keep the numbers fresh in your mind while you're thinking about it. So I want you to think about the way these statistics made you feel. Were you surprised by them? Did they seem high? Did they seem low? Did you you assume this kind of makes sense, these numbers, you weren't surprised by them? If you were surprised, did that make you feel sappy or happy because you thought the numbers would be higher? Or did it make you feel sad because you thought the numbers would be lower? How did the statistics make you feel as well? I'd love for you to pause the video and think about this a little bit and then comment your thoughts underneath the video. And then, of course, feel free to comment on other participants' comments. Feel free to have discussions about it. I'd love to see what everybody has to say. Welcome back from your reflection. We are going to move on to our next talking point, which is public health consequences of substance abuse and substance abuse disorder. Now, we're going to be looking at broader health consequences, or I should say health consequences through a very broad lens. What I mean when I say public health consequences is things that happen as a result of substance use and abuse on a wide scale. So we're looking at it could be communities or groups or even the entire United States as a whole and how substance abuse affects health consequences. So over on the left side of the screen, over here, we have a whole list of different public health issues that we're going to touch on. And now these aren't all of the public health issues that substance abuse affects, but these are a few of them. So we're going to touch on them. The first one on our list is teen pregnancy. In lecture 1, we talked about how substance use increases risky behavior and that includes unprotected sex and unplanned pregnancies. Whether or not the pregnancies are planned or not, teens that use and abuse substances run a higher risk for having teen pregnancy. Um, the following public health issue is HIV and AIDS. Now, this can be, as you know, transmitted through sexual activity or sexual intercourse. It can also be transmitted through needle sharing, which we touched on in lesson 1 as well. The next public health issue is STDs. This is sexually transmitted diseases are of course transmitted through sexual activity. They can also be transmitted through needle sharing. Any sharing of bodily fluids can, I mean, depending on the STD, they can be transferred that way as well. So needle sharing and unprotected sex that happens as a result of substance abuse, it increases the rates of STDs. These kind of are, in my mind, they're kind of lumped together. Our next topic is domestic violence. Domestic violence is violence that happens within the home. So between two people who are in a relationship or people in a family, that's considered domestic violence. And domestic violence increases as substance abuse increases as well. This can happen as a result of the addict themselves becoming violent due to either being on the substance or not having the substance, or due to behavior that is associated with their drug use, or the people that live in the home with them might become violent as a result of their feelings towards the addict's drug use. And we will talk a little bit more about family consequences in our next section. So I'm not going to go too much into this right here. Another aspect similar to that is child abuse and neglect. I lumped those together because they both have to do with family life, and we're going to talk about those in, like I said, in the next section. But child abuse and neglect both happen. And now child abuse doesn't have to be only physical violence towards the child. Neglect is considered child abuse as well, or emotional abuse, mental abuse as well. Those things increase with substance use as well. Another one is motor vehicle crashes. People who are driving under the influence of drugs have a greater risk of crashing their vehicle. And we talked about that risky behavior in lesson 1 that accompanies substance use. Physical fights is the next item on our list. It is like I kind of mentioned in the domestic violence section up here. Physical fights happen more often as a result of substance abuse. Crime is also a public health consequence. And not just necessarily crime that is violent, that physically harms another human. The effects of crime can also have other effects on public health. For example, and this is just one example, if someone breaks into someone's house and steals all of their belongings, or steals some of their belongings or their money or something like that, potentially the victim of the crime might not have money to buy their medicine, or they might be stressed out, and stress is actually a negative health consequence. And it affects the health of an individual and a community or group as a whole. Homicide is the next public health consequence, and then following that is suicide, and suicide rates do increase with substance abuse. This takes us into our next activity reflection. So I'd like you to just take a moment and think about the things that we just touched on. Do any of these consequences stand out to you? Do any of them stand out as being worse or maybe even not as bad as the other ones? Um, Maybe you personally think that some of them seem worse, just something you would prefer not to experience, but maybe your friends or anybody you might know might not think of them as bad. Um, can you think of any other consequences of substance abuse on public health? Can you think of any examples of how these consequences that we've talked about might manifest or might play out? I'd love for you to pause the video here, take maybe 3 minutes or so to kind of reflect on everything that we just discussed, and then comment your thoughts and your answers underneath the video. And as always, please feel free to comment on other users' posts and feel free to discuss your ideas. Welcome back from the reflection activity. This leads us into our next activity. It's a written assignment. I would like for you to explain one negative health outcome of substance abuse on public health in the comment section below the lecture video. You can also post your answers on Instagram or Facebook as well. And if you don't still have them or you're not following yet after watching the first lecture, here's where you can find our Instagram and our Facebook as well. Also, feel free to pause the movie now and go and comment the answers underneath the video now. Otherwise, you can wait till later if you'd like, and we are gonna move on to our next topic of discussion, which is family consequences. We're going to start our discussion of family consequences of substance abuse disorder by looking at children with parents who abuse substances. 20% of children grow up with at least one parent who abuses substances. And this statistic is from this year, 2020, which when the video is being made. Children with parents who abuse substances have a higher risk of suffering from substance abuse disorder. Now, we are going to touch on this in lesson 4 as well, the connection between, and then also some other lectures as well, how having a parent who abuses substances is a risk for the child developing substance abuse disorder as well, and how genetics can affect that. But for now, just keep that in mind that the children who have a parent who is addicted to drugs or abuses substances, they are more likely to suffer from the same disorder as well. These children also have compromised emotional and mental health. They also have lower self-confidence, and often they face challenges to their social development. Consequences that happen in the family also include loss of trust. Now, this can expand farther than just or to other relationships, I should say, than just the parent-child relationship. It can happen within that relationship, and it can also happen within the relationships experienced in other family members. So parent, child, cousins, siblings, brothers and sisters, and this also includes relationships with friends and within social groups as well. So a lot of these, some of these traits also the friends of the addict might experience as well. The loss of trust is one of them. The family members may lose trust in the addict because of the addict's behavior. The addicts may steal from their family members. They may lie. Family may want them to give up drugs, and the drug addict is not getting off the drugs, and so they lose trust in their ability to stop using the substances. So there's a variety of ways that family members might experience this loss of trust. Another consequence is increased stress felt by the family or the friends of the addict. Now, this can actually be experienced by the addict or the family members, or both the addict and the family members. Now, the addict experiences stress from actual using the substances. The addict might have physical stress from the effects of the substances on their body, and they also may have stress that's caused by the problems and the consequences that the substance use creates for them. And we kind of talked about those in lesson one. Family members experience other forms of stress. They may experience anxiety over the safety of the addict. They're worried about the addict's safety, physical, emotional. They also may experience financial problems. Now, this could come in a number of forms. Perhaps the person using the substance is stealing money from them or is costing them money for some reason. They may even not be contributing the money that is supposed that they have committed to contributing because of their substance use. Legal problems could arise from the addict's substance use. And then another one is that the family might have to take on responsibilities of the addict, and that could cause the family stress. One last consequence that we're going to talk about is the physical and emotional abuse that happens within the family of a substance, someone who has substance abuse disorder. Increased disagreements and arguments may happen because the family is mad at this person using, or the drug addict may instigate the arguments. It can kind of go both ways. This may lead to physical violence. It can also lead to emotional abuse or verbal abuse, and this can also go kind of both ways. Perhaps the family members are disgruntled with the person suffering from substance abuse disorder and they get violent or emotionally or verbally abusive. It can also go the other way where the person who's using the substances initiates the abuse. All right, this takes us to our next activity, reflection. I would like you to take a moment to imagine what it might feel to live in this kind of environment, to live in this household where there's somebody who you care about who is abusing drugs or substances. Do you think you would feel angry at the addict? Do you think that there's a particular consequence that would bother you the most? Maybe having somebody emotionally talk down to you or physically abuse you might bother you the most. Perhaps financial problems might bother you the most. Take a look at the consequences and see if you think there's any that you think would be more worse to experience than others. Think if you can see any consequences that you think might be easier for you to handle than others. Can you imagine any other consequences that we haven't touched on? Comment your answers under the video, discuss with other participants, and in a few minutes we'll come back, or in a few minutes when you're done reflecting, unpause the video, and we will move into our next activity. Welcome back. Let's move into our next activity, which is a written assignment. I would like for you to explain one negative outcome of substance abuse on familial life or family life in the comment section below the lecture. Like all the other written assignments, you can also post your answers on the Instagram or Facebook pages, and I have those listed here so that you can find them easily. Let's dive into our last section that we're going to be covering today, which is community consequences. Community consequences, we're going to take a look at this in a wider perspective than family life, but a smaller perspective than the statistics that we looked at the beginning of the video where we were looking at the United States as a whole. Community consequences are more like the town or the neighborhood that you live in, or a community could also be considered a group of people, like a church or an organization of some sort, a group of people. So one community consequence is violence. When there's a lot of substance abuse in a community, it increases the violence in that community. Similarly, we see the same thing with crime rates. As substance abuse increases, so does crime rates. And this can cause a lot of stress and discord within a community. Financial problems are a third community consequence. Now, this goes, we kind of talked about how sometimes the crime rates and increase, and that can kind of contribute to the financial problems such as robberies and theft. Additionally, we can see other financial problems such as communities that need to use a lot of money to pay for funding to hopefully provide treatment for people who are experiencing substance abuse or who have other financial responsibilities to the community due to substance abuse. That money might not be allocated to other things that the community members might want it to be allocated for. A next one is housing problems, and it's also related to homelessness. These two things increase with substance abuse within a community. And all of these things can kind of create a general like unhappiness or unpleasantness or discord within the community. Now, this is going to take us into our last reflection of the lecture. So what I would like you to do is pick one of the consequences that we just talked about. It could be violence, increased crime rates, financial problems, housing, or homelessness. And think about a time when you've seen an example of this. Maybe you've seen somebody who was homeless asking for change or for money. Maybe you've even seen somebody who was breaking into a car or committing a crime or being violent in public. And if you haven't seen an example of this, that's okay. Imagine one, create one in your head. Now think about what it might feel like to witness someone experiencing one of these consequences. And if you do have an example that you've seen or witnessed, try to remember back to what it felt like for you. Now, I want you to imagine that you're this person. Put yourself in their shoes. Imagine that you're the person who might be experiencing one of these consequences due to substance abuse. What might be going on in their heads? What might they be feeling? I want you to take a moment, pause the video, take about 3 minutes to reflect on that, and then describe your answers in the comment section under the video. And also, if you feel like you'd like to, comment on other users' discussions as well. Welcome back from your reflection. The next thing we're going to do is another written assignment activity. I would like you to explain one negative outcome of substance abuse on community life in the comment section below the lecture. You can also post your answers to Instagram and Facebook, and I have those addresses listed right here. Now we're going to review the lecture materials that we just covered. Substance abuse disorder affects more than 16% of the population of the United States. It has negative effects on public health. It has consequences for the entire family or social group of the individual who is experiencing substance abuse disorder. And it has consequences for the community as well. Here is a review of your written assignments. If you haven't paused the video as we've presented the written assignments, you can do them after the video. I'd like you to explain one negative health outcome that substance abuse has on public health. Explain one negative outcome that substance abuse has on family life. And lastly, explain one negative outcome that substance abuse has on the community as a whole. Now remember, you can comment your answers beneath the lecture video. You can also comment on any of the Instagram or Facebook posts, or you can send your answers in direct message on Instagram or Facebook. Here's a list of the resources that were used in this material for this lecture. If you're interested in doing some of your own exploring on the consequences of substance abuse on public health, you can start at these websites, and they will lead you to, other websites as well. And here is your independent practice optional assignment. What I would like you to do is write a letter to an imaginary friend. In this letter, I want you to explain the consequences that substance abuse disorder has on public health, family life, and the community. And like our first independent practice assignment from the lecture number 1, you can let your creativity run wild with this. You can write a letter to an imaginary friend who maybe they're suffering from substance abuse, or your imaginary friend might know somebody who's suffering from substance abuse. You could even write your letter from the perspective of the person, from the addict writing to a friend, explaining the consequences that your substance abuse disorder has on public health, family life, and the community. And the letter doesn't have a length requirement, so it can be as short or as long as you'd like. You can submit this assignment by posting it to social media, either Instagram or Facebook, and tagging the Instagram and Facebook pages, or you can submit it by direct message on one of those social media sites. This concludes lesson number 2. Thank you for watching, and I hope that you get a lot out of this information. Our next lesson will be on the causes of substance abuse disorder, specifically the progression of the disease. So I will see you next time for lesson number 3.